Square Ball Podcast.
Well, Phil Hay, we find ourselves in a playoff final, and now the dust has settled on a fairly eventful second leg of the semi-finals. What do you think of Leeds United's
fairly eventful
Leeds United's journey to get to the playoff final? Then, what do you make of it all?
Dare I say that people found a way to love the playoffs on that Thursday night? It was quite a weird experience, really. I felt like I needed a bit of a trigger warning going into the ground because I was there pretty early, as usually am. And they'd done what they'd done in 2019, which was stick scarves on every single seat. And it was hard not to feel like it was that night set up all over again and bad memories of it coming flooding back. But it was a proper annihilation. And
can I just say, Phil?
Yes.
You didn't even need to specify which night that was. Everybody knows.
Yeah. The night when 20,000 scarves were just left to rot in the kind of stairwells and in amongst the seats.
None spare this time.
No, there were so many last time that I didn't even have to nick two to take them home to the kids. The choice of about genuinely thousands. When we spoke beforehand, you were saying, with hindsight, it's easy to look back and decide whether a particular leg's gone well or whether semi-final's been well handled. So we tried to take a view on the first leg at Norwich, and I think we all agreed that it was well done, really. It was the right thing to do to keep it fairly tight, not to take big risks and to get out of there in a relatively strong position. And I think that totally fed into the game on Thursday. Leeds were excellent. Norwich were abysmal in just about every respect, which I don't think detracts from how well Leeds played. And I think the extent to which Leeds did play well was a factor in how poor Norwich were. But it was basically a story before half-time, because after half-time it was just game over completely. Just total white noise for those 45 minutes, which was great. And obviously Somerville did score, but it wasn't really needed by that point. But in the first half, there were basically 4 moments in which Leeds got it bang on and did what they needed to do going forward. And Millie pulled off that huge save from Josh Sargent, which, if we're talking about trigger warnings and 2019, was, same end of the same stadium, basically the same position on the pitch, same aggregate lead that Leeds had with half an hour of the game gone, and was in its own way as critical, I think, as any of the goals, because that was kind of the moment, wasn't it? And David Wagner said it afterwards. If at any point Ellen Road and Leeds were going to be wobbled, it was by Sargent scoring at that point, where everybody suddenly thought this was, going great, and suddenly we've got questions to ask again.
In the run-up to this, I hoped for, I pleaded to the skies for Leeds to turn up and just to win. And they did. Wasn't that strange?
Yeah, I think it helped, though, that away at Norwich, they'd had this defensive reset, which had reminded them, how to play with good structure, how not to give away the chances that they've been given away from the end of March onwards. In that final period of the regular season, they did deteriorate collectively and individually, but everybody played well on Thursday night. A lot of players played pretty well at Norwich. There weren't any poor performances at Norwich, but on Thursday, every single player, front to back, was excellent. And you had this weird thing where, Mellier's form had been kind of picked at, and I think, deservedly over the weeks before, but he comes up with that huge save. You had Pirro, who again I think deservedly picked at because he hadn't been playing well, who suddenly looked like kind of prime number 9. You had Ruta scoring that goal. Just everything that needed to happen and needed to go well did. And I think it is a feather in Farke's cap that after a poor run-in and a bad finish to the season, when second place was there for the taking, and so was the title for a while, that he was able to get it together for the playoffs and to do it so impressively. And obviously the way in which you reflect on these playoffs as a whole will depend entirely on Sunday. Nobody is going to look back with huge amounts of joy at the Norwich game if it's a defeat at Wembley. But to recover like that, I thought spoke pretty highly of everybody.
When you saw the team pre-game, were you surprised, and how did you think it would go? Because I felt, having seen how stable we were at Norwich, I felt a little bit worried that we'd almost gone back to the thing that had not been working. I know Byron was injured, so some changes were needed, but it was definitely a change in structure.
Yeah, it was. I was chatting to Radio Leeds beforehand, and it was about 10 minutes before the team was announced, and they were saying, what do you think he's going to do with the lineup? And I said to them, I'm totally in two minds here, because obviously Bamford wasn't going to be fit, and it had been strong and it had been well structured down at Norwich, but it also wasn't massively ambitious, and you kind of felt like putting Gray back in at 10 or reverting a little bit more to a 3-man midfield, was almost sending the wrong message to a crowd who were exactly as you expected the crowd at Ellen Road to be. It was basically perfect on both fronts. The atmosphere was spot on. Really difficult for Norwich to live with, as it is at Ellen Road when it gets going, and the team were the same. So my sort of gut feeling was that even though it hadn't particularly gone well with Pirro, what option was there, given that it was not going to be Joseph there? It felt as if you had to at least look from the outset like you were going to win that game, as opposed to going into it hoping that it was just going to fall for you, or that it might get through to extra time or penalties or whatever else. It was a case of taking the initiative, and I do think it sent the right message. And the weird thing about Norwich was that, if they were set up to be resolute and resilient and whatever else, it was an absolute disaster of a plan.
Do you think everything went right on the day? It was just, It felt like it. It felt like even from that kickoff, when they tried the free kick rather, when they tried the little cheeky manoeuvre going at the near post, and you've seen the video footage afterwards, and you're like, they're scheming this, the clever little sausages. That was really, really good, wasn't it? And it felt like that set the platform. Leeds got after them from the get-go, and that free kick, early goal, obviously helps to settle everybody down. Stadium went absolutely bananas. Everybody gets that big rush of belief that had been missing perhaps in the run-up to this because of all the stuff that's gone before. And it was just like, that went right. Then we scored again at a good time, scored again at a good time. Just
add to that as well, Gruev scoring, in a season where centre midfielders have not scored at all, and he's not somebody who scores regularly either. I mean, it's absolutely not the reason why Leeds signed him in the summer. That's just not what he does. The two things I think that jumped out of the Norwich game about Norwich specifically was the first being that once the game got into the second half and Leeds started to get on top, they looked really limited in an attacking sense. But also, they did look like they had a centre-back line that you could get at. Not a lot of pace in there. There were a couple of moments at Carrow Road where Gibson, Duffy tried to dribble with the ball at their feet to carry it in and ran themselves into trouble. And I think that was definitely their weak spot. And I have a feeling, obviously Wagner's been sacked. He was sacked the day after the game. But I have a feeling that when they start to rebuild the squad over the summer, Norwich, because they're not actually a bad team, they've got some good players down there.
And Ashley Barnes.
We should get onto that. Actually.
I was going to say that's my next question.
Let's shift on to that shortly. But they need quicker, more mobile, I think better on the ball centre backs, and that was where the pressure was really coming. They were not able to. Obviously, that wasn't where the build-up was coming, but they were not able to hold it together once Leeds got at them. And I think that moment where Duffy sort of roughly prodded the ball over to Rutter and Rutter smashed it in off the bar told you how much they were struggling. And then there was a great moment after that where Duffy and Gibson were kind of chirping at each other. And there was just gathering of Norwich players outside the box. And when you looked at them outside their box, as there was a break in play, and when you looked at them closely on the cameras, they had no idea what to say to each other. They just knew the whole thing was ruined.
It's a shame for Duffy because he's prepared really well for these playoff games as well. He's been super professional.
Anyway, Ashley Barnes.
Yes. Considering that he was the target of the ire from the terraces and not Duffy, should we say?
Here's the thing, right? Tyrone Mings gets this, okay? But Tyrone Mings knows that he's a good player, and he is a good player. And he also knows that it's a game. So there's every chance that he makes a mistake, Leeds score against Villa, and he gets rinsed by the crowd. There's also every chance that he heads in a corner and he's able to rinse them in return. And I'm not saying that Mings wants every game to be like that. He wants to be going through every game with people chanting at him. But everybody's in on it. Like it's kind of part of the routine.
There's a transaction, isn't there? Yeah,
it is.
You know that you get to absolutely rinse them and take the piss, and it could come back to bite you on the arse.
Yeah, it could absolutely blow up in your face and backfire. So there's a bit of fun to it, and Mings in his own way is kind of investing in that. And as I say, he is just a very good player, Mings, whatever anybody says. Barnes had no idea. I had not anticipated that quite clearly. I had no idea how to deal with it. Couldn't really comprehend the fact that was going on.
Yeah.
And, without wanting to take too much pleasure in it, the standing ovation when he got substituted is one of the funniest things I've seen at Ellen Road for
If you were
years.
going to write a comedy script for a moment, you would have written something like that, wouldn't you?
I wonder whether Wagner was thinking, the game's lost. He's getting a complete doing from the crowd here. Maybe it's best that I take him off and get him out of it. But actually, it might be better just to have left him on the pitch.
It was a full in the town square having fruit and veg thrown at you, wasn't it?
100%.
It was just like, let's all laugh at this person.
Yeah,
this unfortunate for a little
while. And I did
while.
wonder, given the timing of it, which was at about 70 minutes, wasn't it? 5 o'clock, as we like to call it, whether because Ashley Barnes was coming back from injury, that it was a pre-planned substitution, but surely you've got to take the kind of the game state, the context, the crowd state into your mind when it comes to stuff like this. Mind you,
I suppose you're damned either way, aren't you?
And I was going to say it's fairly inconsequential now when you're getting hammered at that point, and then Wagner gets sacked the day after.
Yeah, well, I mean, between GFH refusing to sign him because of Football Manager and that on Thursday, it's not happy hunting ground for him, Leeds.
Yeah, and I was going to say there's the Stuart Dallas tackle at Burnley, I think, which I hadn't forgotten about.
No, he's not a crowd favourite.
We've got memories like elephants when it comes to grudges and beef.
Yeah.
Rodon handled him well, though, I thought, throughout the game, because every single ball towards them, Barnes basically had a little dig at Rodon.
Yeah.
And for the most part, Rodon just ignored him and won the ball. That seemed to be the easiest way of dealing with it.
I just don't think in the Championship, Rodon's a player you can particularly bully. I think if and when Leeds go up, then Rodon will get tested far more, and we'll find out one way or the other. But he's not going to get particularly rattled by that. But that's why the Meslier save from Sargent. Actually, I saw Meslier on Monday, did a piece with him, and that's running Friday on our site. He was talking about that save specifically. That's why that was so crucial, because it was the one moment where Barnes was able to drop off, play a ball through, and it was difficult for Meslier because there was just that split second where you thought Ampadu was going to get that and was going to lay his foot on it. So Meslier can't commit too quickly, but then suddenly Sargent is through, and that save was absolutely brilliant. Like the technique of it, and also Meslier was saying that he in that sort of split second he was able to see that Sargent was going for the chip, which is why he put his hand up. And that would have, I'm not saying it would have turned the game in a way that Leeds would have lost it, but it would have turned the atmosphere completely.
Yeah.
I'd have probably gone wide. It was Josh Sargent.
Mr. Hindsight there, yeah, I was going to say. But do you know what? Again, another example of you talking about Pirro before, another example of a player who has had question marks over his suitability, maybe his mentality a bit. Has he got, the cojones to deal with this club? And actually, although he did wobble in the last couple of weeks of the season, the day when it mattered, this semi-final, he delivered in the crucial moment that he had to deliver.
Do you know what's so frustrating about Pirro? Is that if he plays like that, he's absolutely a 9. I don't see any problem with him playing at a 9. Again, whether or not he's a 9 in the Premier League, I think is questionable. And that would be a decision that Leeds would have to take. I don't think he's a player you move on, actually, if you get promoted. He's the sort of guy who, and you see this with quite a lot of players who go up out of the Championship, might actually adapt pretty well, might come up with, 5 to 10 goals, something like that. And I don't think, even despite the price of him, you could in any way put it down as a bad sign. And there have been plenty of goals. There have been, good performances. It just hasn't been a killer season from start to finish for him. And I think because he did come in at such a price, you look for the best of him, don't you, rather than necessarily giving him an awful lot of leeway. But I do, I know there's been this thing constantly about, is he a 9, is he a 10, does anybody really know? But coached and made to play and sort of committing to playing like he did, running the wings, creating space, dropping deep, everything else, I don't see any reason why he can't fit into that role. And that goal again, I mean, Angus Gunn was having a nightmare by that point between the goal and then that cross from Nonto, which he sort of came for and then didn't and was nowhere when it came to actually saving the header from Pirro. But that cross from Nonto was just beautiful. And, Pirro sticks it away because that's kind of what he does. I don't think, we'll see Farke in the next 24 hours, but assuming that fitness role is as it was before, then Pirro starts at Wembley, doesn't he?
I think the frustration with Pirro sometimes, particularly when things haven't been going well, he just looks very laid back and slow. Whereas all of a sudden he seems to have found some pace in this game, and the
Sleepy Joel.
Yeah, but that's the thing with him. But the intensity was there, and he just felt like he was on it and determined in this game in a way that sometimes you just want to shake him a bit, don't you? And be like, come on, you need to make things happen.
I suppose he's just kind of, I don't know, is he the standard bearer when it comes to that? You kind of just wanted to wake a few of them up, didn't you, actually, in the run-up to this? And then, like I say, it just all clicked. Every one of them who needed to perform and be switched on was switched on. But no, I agree with Pirro. Yeah, you kind of want to, why didn't you just do that before?
But maybe it's a good lesson, though, because in the Premier League, you just don't get away with sleepy performances at all. You've got to be on it all the time, and coaches generally will just not play if you're not, or will not commit to you particularly heavily. If you don't have that attitude, and he is going to have to play like that if Leeds go up to the Premier League, because he isn't he isn't that good in the sense that he's a kind of sure thing in the Premier League. He's like quite a few at Leeds is going to have to prove himself. But in that sort of form and with that type of performance, you would pick him, no question.
Absolutely. And what I really liked was how they responded to the crowd rather than wilted in the face of it. It felt like a big statement about their mentality compared to what we've seen before. You know
how often it's said we need the crowd and we need the supporters and everything else. So often the crowd do their bit, and there does come a kind of dividing line where once you cross it, the players actually have to do it themselves as well. And I think that's what everybody got on Thursday. Was the crowd were fantastic. I mean, it's funny because after Leicester, there were people saying that's about the best I've ever seen Ellen Road. And I think the Norwich game went beyond that, didn't it?
Oh God, yeah.
By miles.
Yeah. It was. I'll say febrile is the word I use.
And the thing is, Leicester was 10 minutes, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This was 90 minutes. I think that was the difference because it was heading for actually a little bit of a drab evening was Leicester.
Yeah.
Until it flipped quite spectacularly. Whereas this, it felt like from the first minute to the last, it went from being intense and by the end just people having a good time and laughing at Ashley Barnes, but it was all just incredibly good fun.
Normanton's perfect night.
Yeah. How do you think? I mean, I know it will always be framed around the context of what happens in the final ultimately, but I look back really fondly on like the Cardiff away, the Carlisle away second leg of the semi-final, just for that moment, for the Howson moment, and nearly losing a lung on that terrace as just limbs were flying everywhere. How do you think we're going to look back on this night in 10 years' time?
I feel like as time goes on and as football develops, people get less attached. I don't mean at Leeds, I just mean broadly, less attached to moments that don't actually lead to anything. But I've said loads of times on this podcast, and this probably becomes partly on the basis of who I follow up north, that if you don't win things regularly and if you don't have many days in the sun, and let's be honest, like the last 20 years have been basically shit, with the exception of a kind of golden period with Bielsa, of which part of it was taken out from the crowd's point of view by COVID, so you weren't able to go. So you had this magical period which you'd earned 10 times over and you could invest in emotionally, but actually weren't able to be there physically for quite a lot of it. And when that's how it is, you do have to tie yourself to the individual moments that actually mean something, like Thursday night. If that's not why you're there, then what are you there for? Like you get a lot of chat over the next kind of 48 hours before Wembley of, is Will Ferrell going to be at Wembley? Who's coming over? Is Michael Phelps going to be there? All the great and good in the 49ers group. But that's all just kind of showbiz. The football is the football. And I don't know about you, I'm not going to Wembley on Sunday to see Will Ferrell, personally. I just want to see Leeds win the game and the crowd to have what they just haven't had for 20 years. And I know they had the Bielsa period, but even the promotion night, there were 5,000 outside Ellen Road, which was 5,000 more than there was really supposed to be. But it would have been packed. It would have been absolutely heaving on that evening. So you've got to invest in these moments.
The Square Ball Podcast.